We note in our piece that KIRK describes King as, quote, a bad guy. It's true. And KIRK's self-described very, very radical view that the country made a mistake when it passed the Civil Rights Act. Also true.
Tonight, we're diving into a controversial question. Why would someone like Charlie Kirk call Martin Luther King Jr. a bad dude? It's a claim that shocks many, given MLK's iconic status as a civil rights hero. But to dismiss Kirk's critique outright is to ignore the complexity of history. Let's examine the arguments behind his stance, arguments rooted in MLK's own words, the hidden dynamics of the civil rights movement, and the enduring consequences of his legacy. We'll explore whether MLK might have been a pawn, why he feared leading his people into a burning building, the role of the FBI in smearing his name, and how his methods contrast with modern conservative leaders like Kirk. Kirk and others argue that MLK was not the sole driver of the civil rights movement, but a figure manipulated by powerful forces, government agencies, white liberals, or even international actors, to achieve goals that weren't entirely in the best interest of Black Americans.
Free at last! Free at last! Thank God Almighty! We are free at last!
After Dr. King gave his famous March on Washington speech, Wednesday, August 28th, 1963, in a memo dated the 30th of August, no later than that, the second person in the FBI, it may have been Sullivan, sends an urgent memo in which he says, after the March on Washington, it's clear that Martin Luther King Jr. is the most dangerous Negro in America. And we have to use every resource at our disposal to destroy him.
J. Edgar Hoover's FBI actively worked to destroy MLK. They tapped his phones and bugged his hotel rooms, sent him an infamous 1964 letter urging him to commit suicide.
The FBI sent the package anonymously to Dr. King on November 21st, 1964. But it went unopened for over a month because King was in Oslo, Norway, accepting the Nobel Prize.
The first person to eventually open Sullivan's threatening package long after Christmas is Mrs. King. King and his associates, when they listen to the tape after reading the threatening letter, have no doubt whatsoever that this is from the FBI. King goes into a very deep depression. And of course, the FBI, which is still wiretapping his phones, knows about the discovery of the package and the emotional impact it has on King.
MLK's wife, Coretta Scott King, consistently stated the rumors were largely false or exaggerated, part of a deliberate smear campaign. She said, the FBI was trying to prove that he was a sexual deviant. They didn't have any real evidence.
If the FBI believed in early 1965 that their threat would intimidate Dr. King, they would soon find that they were mistaken. In March of that year, he helped lead the civil rights movement's most iconic demonstration in Selma, Alabama. King and other leaders organized a series of marches to demand greater federal protection for the rights of Black citizens to vote. Thousands marched from Selma to the state capital of Montgomery. The first march became known as Bloody Sunday, after a white mob and state police attacked unarmed demonstrators. Five months later, King and his colleagues' strategy of nonviolent protest paid off when President Lyndon Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act of 1965. When President Johnson stood to present Dr. King with another ceremonial pen, he did so with the full knowledge of the compromising information the FBI had gathered on him over the previous 18 months.
Across 1965, 1966, the FBI tires of its obsession with Dr. King's private life. In the spring of 1965, King and his family moved from one home to another, and at that time, the FBI decided not to reinstall its wiretap on King's home telephone
It seemed that Hoover and the FBI's efforts to neutralize Dr. King were a failure, and their investigation stalled.
Was MLK's movement being used to serve America's global image rather than solely black liberation? The shift in focus. After the major legislative victories, the movement's focus shifted from legal equality to economic justice and decentralization, e.g., the Poor People's Campaign. Many white allies and funding sources pulled back, leaving the movement vulnerable. KIRK might argue this shift exposed how MLK's initial success was tied to a narrative convenient for white America, not a sustainable revolution for black autonomy. MLK's own warnings. In 1967, MLK publicly criticized the Vietnam War and called for radical economic restructuring, alienating his white allies in the Johnson administration.
We, the participants in today's unprecedented national peace demonstration, although of many national origins, faiths, and shades of political opinion, are united in our conviction of the imperative need for an immediate, peaceful solution to an illegal and unjustifiable war. We are determined that the killing be stopped and that a nuclear holocaust be avoided. We rally at the United Nations in order to reaffirm our support of the principles of peace, universality, equal rights, and self-determination of peoples embodied in the Charter and acclaimed by mankind, but violated by the United States.
If MLK was initially elevated by white power structures to achieve specific limited goals, only to be abandoned when he demanded more, doesn't that suggest he was a tool?
I think America must see that riots do not develop out of thin air. Certain conditions continue to exist in our society, which must be condemned as vigorously as we condemn riots. In the final analysis, a riot is the language of the unheard. What is it that America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the plight of the Negro poor has worsened over the last few years. It has failed to hear that the promises of freedom and justice have not been met. It has failed to hear that large segments of white society are more concerned about tranquility and the status quo than about justice, equality, and humanity. And so in a real sense, our nation's summers of riots are caused by our nation's winters of delay. And as long as America postpones justice, we stand in the position of having these recurrences of violence and riots over and over again. Social justice and progress are the absolute guarantors of riot prevention.
I fear I've walked my people into a burning building. MLK's own doubts. In 1968, just months before his assassination, MLK said, "I fear I've walked my people into a burning building." This isn't a quote from his detractors, it's MLK himself. The context, the rise of black power. MLK saw the emergence of groups like the Black Panthers, who advocated for armed self-defense and black nationalism. He feared the movement was fracturing and turning violent. The Poor People's Campaign. His final push for economic justice was met with fierce resistance, violence, and poor organization. He worried it would fail and leave his people worse off. His murder in April 1968 felt like the ultimate burning building. The movement lost its central figure at its most vulnerable moment. If MLK himself expressed such deep dread about the direction he was leading his people, doesn't that validate the idea that his strategy had fatal flaws? Critics ask, did MLK's vision of integration fail? KIRK and others see MLK's focus on legal equality as outdated. They argue today's focus on identity politics and reparations goes beyond what MLK wanted. Distrust of institutions. The FBI's war on MLK fuels modern distrust of government. If they targeted him, what else have they done? So was Martin Luther King Jr. a bad dude? No, in the traditional sense. His courage, vision, and sacrifices were monumental. He ended legal segregation and inspired generations. But Charlie Kirk's critique forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. MLK was a product of his time and the complex political forces around him. He might have been used, at least initially. He expressed deep doubts about the path he was on. The rumors about his personal life, while likely amplified by the FBI, reveal he was human, flawed like all leaders. His methods were not universally accepted, even then. Coretta Scott King warned against reducing her husband to scandals. The content of his character was his greatest legacy. Bernice King echoes this, emphasizing his message of love and justice. MLK was neither a perfect saint nor a bad dude. He was a complex, visionary leader who made mistakes and faced immense pressure. Charlie Kirk's critique, while often inflammatory, highlights the need to view history critically, not as a simple hero narrative, but as a story of flawed humans navigating impossible challenges. MLK's legacy endures not because he was perfect, but because his core message of justice, equality, and the power of nonviolent love remains urgently needed, even in today's divided America. The assassinations of figures like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and more recently Charlie Kirk serve as stark reminders of pivotal moments in our history. We've discussed the FBI's internal memo from 1963, labeling Dr. King as the most dangerous Negro in America shortly after his March on Washington speech, and their stated intent to destroy him. Now, as we reflect on these powerful and tragic events, a critical question arises. What lessons can we draw from the assassinations of leaders such as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Charlie Kirk, especially when considering the potential for hidden agendas or underlying forces at play that seek to silence influential voices?
Talk about the threats that were out. What would happen to me from some of our sick white brothers? Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Drop your thoughts below. Let's have the real conversation. Smash that like button if you're done with the lies. Subscribe and hit the bell, because on There's No Lies Left, we don't just talk truth, we demand it.